Today's story begins in the California Gold Rush on this episode of Antique Bottle Stories. James Folger was born in 1835 in Massachusetts. His parents were Samuel and Nancy, and they had 9 kids. James was the second youngest. So, a little fun fact. One of his ancestors from Nantucket, Massachusetts, named Mary Morrill Folger, was the grandmother of Benjamin Franklin. So, they are distantly related. That's pretty cool. So now, James was 14 years old when President James Polk made a speech in 1848 that vast gold deposits were found in California. So 14-year-old James, along with 2 of his older brothers, 16-year-old Henry and 20-year-old Edward, decided to make the trip out to California from Massachusetts. As a mom, my jaw dropped. I mean, what mom would let her babies take a trip like that? There was no cell phones to let her know that they made it okay. Anyways, they ended up jumping on a boat, headed for the Isthmus of Panama, which was quite an adventure in itself. Finally, after 8 months' total journey, which included hiking, rafts, and ships, they arrived in California in May of 1850. Now, we all know by then there wasn't much gold to be found by this time, which all too many people learned as they arrived. Regardless, the older Folger boys went out to the gold fields. Now James, who's 15 now, he decided to stay behind in San Francisco, and he worked for a guy named William Bovee, who ran a spice and coffee shop called Pioneer Steam Coffee and Spice Mills. Now James began selling coffee and tea to miners. I also see that the shop is also named Empire Store at some point. Here's a 1852 ad in the paper. Now let's fast forward a little bit to 1861. 26-year-old James has become a business partner with a Ira Marden. It looks like they also sell spices and mustard. James is also married now. He and Eleanor have 4 babies, but 2 of them died. 2 of their sons make it to adulthood, James Jr. and Ernest. It looks like we almost lost James Jr. there for a minute too. In this 1880 census, James Jr. is listed as having typhoid fever. So here in 1865, it's still called Marden and Folger. The directories skip 1866, and then by 1867, James has bought out Marden and renamed the business J.A. Folger and Company. And we see he's partnered with a guy named Otto Schumann. Now in 1869, we see James Folger is elected councilman. Also in 1869, one of the older brothers that James came over with, Edward, he died. He's only 40. He was in a stagecoach when it turned a sharp turn around a mountain in Nevada, and it tumbled over the edge with about 15 people traveling in it. The next day, their mom died. Talk about a rough week. Speaking of their mom, I wonder how long she had to wait to hear back from them once they made it to California. Anyways, by the way, the other brother, Henry, he ended up going back to the East Coast. He settled in New York, he ran a business there, and he died over there. Now, this 1882 directory shows that James has got a new partner. Also, he's a dealer of coffees, teas, spices, and it says he's a proprietor of Pioneer Steam Coffee and Spice Mills. So I guess that's still the name of the coffee shop. It's a little confusing. Now here's an 1887 ad that says the Empire Store, which is, I guess, another name for the shop at this time, or maybe these are multiple locations, I'm not sure. Anyways, you can buy a 5-pound bag of Folger's coffee for $1 in 1887. In June 1889, at the age of 54, James died of heart failure. A year prior to his death, he had written a letter to his son stating that there was more to running a successful business than making a profit, and that money-making was always secondary to a good reputation. A speaker at James's funeral, who had known him for over 17 years, said very nice things about him. James was a churchgoer, he was honest, he said he was a pleasant man, and he feels poorer in his own life with James gone. Now, during James's horse-drawn funeral procession, apparently there were a couple rogue horses that ran off, and they came close to crashing into the wagon that was carrying James' body. So, James's oldest son, James Jr., who is 26 years old now, he stepped up to the role of president of the J.A. Folger and Company. Now, this 1893 article in the paper kind of paints James Jr. as kind of a carefree. He's been president for about 4 years now, and this says that he used to be involved in community affairs, but as of late, he ran off to Japan, then to Mexico, and he never mentioned anything about leaving. I'm guessing this is just like as a neighbor, because back then they would announce any comings and goings in the paper. Now, here's a 1900 directory showing James Jr. as president, a Charles Platt as vice president, and James's brother Ernest is assistant secretary. Here's a 1900 ad for Folger's Golden Gate Coffee. Now, this is the first time that I see the Golden Gate in the name of their coffee. The new Folger factory was built in 1905. Just 1 year later, the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 hit. The Folger building survived the disaster. Let me read you a part of this article. Spirit is wonderfully buoyant in the face of distress, and neither disorder nor complaints are evident along the bread line. Volunteer distributors are issuing provisions under military protection. The committee has secured 2 main warehouses at the J.A. Folger building and the Mulder Schoolhouse. It goes on to say that the mayor is planning on paying laborers who are clearing and renovating the city. Isn't that something? They were already just doing it. On the Folger's website, it says that during the rebuilding process, the citizens were given free coffee. Now, the Folger building still stands. It survived the earthquake of 1906, and it also survived the 1989 earthquakes. It was used for Folger's offices until 2011, when the University of San Francisco bought it. Now, here's an ad in 1908, and I just put this in here because you can see what the canister looked like for their coffee. Here's 1910. Here's showing James Jr. as president, and now Ernest, his brother, is now vice president. Now, here's 1920, and here's another ad looking at what the canister looks like. Now, in 1921, James Jr. dies. He had been running the company for 32 years. At this point, his brother, Ernest Rudolph, then takes over as president for the next 16 years. Now, while he was running the company, his nephews, which is James Jr.'s sons, James III and Peter, they both help him run the company. Now, here's a 1935 directory showing Ernest as president, James III as vice president. And then in 1937, Ernest died, leaving James III in charge of the company. Now, James III ran it for about 5 or 6 years. See, here's 1942 with James, and then his brother Peter took over as president. See, here's 1944 with Peter. So here's a 1960 article with Peter about to get married to an employee of his. This is his second marriage. He's already got 2 kids. But I mean, he's a good-looking guy, and she's quite cute herself. Here they are at the wedding reception. Now, speaking of Peter's 2 kids, one of them is named Abigail. She was really good friends with actress Sharon Tate. Well, 25-year-old Abigail happened to be staying at Sharon's place during that fateful night when Charles Manson's deranged family came in and brutally murdered 8 months pregnant Sharon, along with Abigail and 3 other people. This was a really crazy rabbit hole I wish I didn't go down, because it's been giving me nightmares for a few nights. Apparently, Abigail managed to get out of the house and ran, but someone chased her down and stabbed her in the yard. Boy, that was a really grisly story. Sheesh. Okay, let's get back on track here. So in 1960, they began construction on their New Orleans plant, which is where they still reside today. Now, Peter ended up selling the Folgers company to Procter & Gamble in 1963. And just for fun, I found this 1963 ad in the paper for a new refrigerator for $188, and it includes 19 pounds of Folger's coffee. And while we're looking at this, look, a new stove is $119, and a washer and dryer is under $300 if you buy the pair. Now, Peter died in 1980, and I don't know if any Folgers family are active in the company at this point. So, my Folgers bottle says Folgers Golden Gate Flavoring Extract. So this bottle is blown, tooled top, and I can't find much about it. But the earliest ad that I can find for it in the paper is 1911, and this states that there is multiple flavors. And I see one ad in 1920, so it was around at least during that time frame. So when I first got this bottle, I thought this could have only been a coffee extract. But no, not necessarily. This could have been any of the popular extracts at the time. Vanilla, who knows? So I found some pretty funny commercials, and I'm going to leave you with those. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
You make me feel very unwifely, McNaughton. Go barbecue.
I still say don't serve your awful coffee with my steaks.
Oh, Mrs. Olson, he's always crabbing about my coffee. I could cry.
Your coffee, sir.
Thanks, beautiful.
You're welcome.
How can such a pretty wife make such bad coffee?
I heard that. Darling, it's our anniversary. Why so glum?
Nothing. Well, it's your coffee.
Again? Even today?
Honey, your coffee just doesn't taste any good.
This must have been such a nice vacation. Did you ever see Larry looking so happy?
Oh, honey, happiness is a vacation. Away from your coffee.
Forget the coffee, Marge. It's never very good.
But Phil,
I'll get some at the plant.
Harold, is the coffee all right?
Mm-mm.
You mean it's as bad as yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
No improvement at all?
Mm-mm.
Harold, don't just shake your head. You've got to tell me what's wrong with the coffee.
Bad taste.
Attention, ladies, please. Right now, at the end of aisle 2, I've set out a brand new, can't-miss, husband-pleasing coffee.
Oh, no.
What's wrong?
Oh, it's your coffee again. The desk sergeant at the station makes better coffee than this.
Ed, really?
Sorry, honey. But your coffee tastes terrible.
Mrs. Olson. Mary, come in. My goodness. You look as if you lost your last friend.
It's my Jim again. You should have heard him this morning. Mary, your coffee is as undrinkable as ever.
Oh, and Jim's always so nice. I hope you and Tom are enjoying meeting all your new neighbors, Diane.
Oh, we are.
Oh, I'm so glad.
You made us feel so at home. Everything's wonderful.
Even the coffee's better. Here.
Wonderful anniversary, dear, and thank you for the flowers.
You're welcome, darling. But if you could do one thing for me,
What?
try to do something about your coffee.
I hoped it would be better today.
Harvey, want anything special for your birthday?
Just a decent cup of coffee.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. Honey, your coffee's undrinkable.
It's pretty harsh.
Well, so's your coffee. You know, the girls down at the office make better coffee on their hot plates. Well, see you later.
Oh, this coffee is criminal.
Honey, you killed the petunias.
Then you admit it. Your coffee really is murder.
Papa Eddie, my coffee, it's murder. It's either too bitter or too weak.
Try Folgers. Because Folgers coffee is mountain grown.
Mountain grown?
Like the sign says. Mountain grown for richer flavor.
You know, it's a crime not to have delicious coffee like this all the time.
We will, now that I've discovered the mountains. Ooh.
Folgers coffee, mountain grown for richer flavor.